Okay, so I think we'll begin now. Good morning, and thank you again for joining us this morning. My name is Cindy Mann, and I'm the Member and Business Development Specialist here at the Halifax Chamber, and your host for today's session. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to Navigating COVID-19 webinar. I'm really looking forward to today's topic of discussion. Managers are at the forefront of business trying to navigate a post-crisis economy. We'll be discussing how managers can interact with their teams in a way that will bring out the best and most effective qualities. We also want to know how managers can lead their teams to success, whether they're working from home or in a new workplace environment. So this webinar is the perfect opportunity to raise those questions and get answers to support businesses going forward. So just a couple of housekeeping items. If you do have a question during the presentation, please type it in the Q&A box. And if you're commenting in the chat box, I would encourage you to address your message to panelists and all attendees so that everyone can see that question, as it may be of interest to all. There's also an option to address your message to all panelists, which only I and the presenter will be able to see if you prefer to do that. So I'm very pleased and excited to introduce our presenter, David Osborne, Vice President of Predictive Success. Welcome, David. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. A pleasure to be here this morning, and those of us in maybe offices without any windows won't miss that beautiful sunshine that we're finally getting outside. So thank you for joining us today. We are in for an exciting 40-minute ride together. We're going to talk a little bit about what drives people, what motivates them to do great things with their knowledge, skills, experience, and values. That's going to, of course, apply to us as business leaders. It's also going to apply to the great people that we work with every single day as well. And we're going to talk a little bit what that might look like as we all try to navigate this new reality we're in together. So thank you again very much for joining us. So as we start our conversations, a little bit about who we are. Some of you might have had a chance to do a little bit of homework on this. Thomas and I, who I'll introduce you in a moment, are part of a global organization called the Predictive Index. We have hundreds and hundreds of Dave Osbornes around the world working through a business partnership network. And one of our instruments is called the Predictive Index, as we'll talk a little bit about as an example of a leadership assessment profile. We work with thousands of organizations, large and small, family and privately owned, public and private, for-profit and not-for-profit. Global operations to this day still reside in the Boston area of the US. I'm part of the Canadian operation called Predictive Success. We have a 15-person team across the country who does a lot of similar work to what I do here in Atlantic Canada. And I'm based here in Halifax and have the privilege of working throughout our 4 Atlantic provinces, with some work also being done in New England as well. About 4,000 managers have gone through our training program over the past few years here in Atlantic Canada, and it's a real pleasure again to be with you today. I'm joined by my co-pilot, Thomas, who is going to help navigate questions and Q&A and navigate some of the polls we're going to be working with as well this morning. So thank you again for joining us. Before we get started, Thomas, can you just give us a quick intro to how they want to stay in touch with us?
For sure, everyone. So the easiest way for you to be able to send anything to us will be through the chat box in the bottom, but feel free to add to the question and answer box as well. Towards the end of the session, I know Dave has built in some time to answer some questions. As a consultant, that's a big part of his role. If any time you lose connection or anything like that and you need help getting back in, feel free to send me an email. My email's right there and I will be monitoring. And then the last thing is we will be using the polling function, so just watch for that to pop up on your screen. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate that. Excellent. So to get us started, we're going to start with just a very quick poll. We're curious to know a little bit about the dynamics of our audience here this morning. So if we could maybe in the chat sort of put a quick note, are you a business owner? Are you a manager in a business? Are you an individual contributor? So you're not really managing or owning, but you're actually doing great work in the organization. And briefly, are you a for-profit or not-for-profit? So we can just take a moment, just a couple of quick notes in the chat there for Thomas. So we got a bit of a sense as to our group this morning, and we can focus our conversations as strategically as we can. So Thomas, maybe you can just give me a bit of a heads up as those results start coming in for us, please.
For sure. So we have manager for not-for-profit, HR manager for not-for-profit, a lot of managers, managers for both not-for-profit and for-profit organizations. So a diverse crowd here of positions, nonprofit coordinator, manager, et cetera, et cetera.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. That's great. Thank you, folks, for participating. That ensures we can stay as focused as we can be in your world, not ours, this morning as we continue our conversation. So thank you for that. So as we all know, we're going through some unprecedented times. We've all gone, or many of us perhaps have gone through some economic recessions in the past. Our organization has gone through several of these over the years, being in business for over 65 years. But this is pretty unique for many of us, where we're having to deal with health and economic situations. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do we manage through a crisis. And we hope we never have to face something like this again. But businesses and organizations go sort of through versions of crisis on an ongoing basis. So we're going to talk about some lessons learned, some insights we've gleaned already from folks like you, and also share some best practices to stay resilient as we power through this together. So some things that we're saying, and where I'm sure we're all on the same page here, we are pivoting our business priorities today. We've had to pivot very, very quickly, perhaps in more of what we did before, or perhaps a whole new direction. And we've seen some tremendous success stories here with our Halifax Chamber of Commerce membership, and many organizations being able to pivot quite successfully in a new opportunity. We also need to think about the success of our business pre-COVID was based on our people, and the success of our business during and post-COVID is also going to be based on our people. So the common theme throughout our conversation here today is people. So I want us to sort of be reminded of the great people that brought us to where we are, and the great people that are going to carry us forward as we power out of this together. The other thing I want us to think a little bit about is, are our people, including yourself, are we aligned appropriately to execute on the new priorities that are absolutely there in our organization? And so remember that before this whole scenario happened, we probably had sort of a plan A business strategy. We may be working on a plan B, or maybe even a plan C right now, as we're now into nearly the end of March. Organizations like the Predictive Success, we don't make the decisions for you. You, of course, do that. But what we in our consulting and advisory businesses do will help you navigate through this and offer some advice and best practices, both regionally, nationally, and globally, to help you power through successfully. A couple of objectives today. So we want to talk a little bit about, how do you adapt to lead? So we want to think a little bit about taking care of ourselves, so we're better equipped to assist our team, our families, our business, and our community. We also want to talk a little bit about how, or if you need to realign operations, how are you going to make that happen? So coming at it from what we call a human analytics point of view, sort of right people, right role, if you will, for today's needs versus maybe that might have been different a couple of weeks ago. The other thing we want to talk about is, as we start to bring more and more of our team maybe back into the virtual office or physical offices or the facilities we operate, we may be dealing with what I call frozen people. People that are sort of paralyzed by uncertainty and rapid unannounced change and fear, quite frankly. So we want to talk a little bit about how we can adapt our leading style, realigning our operations from a people perspective, and how can we unfreeze, unleash the potential of our great people as we start to bring them back into our environments. Here are some of the risks, as we have the privilege in our organization of working with large and small organizations across our region. Here's some things we're hearing and seeing already. Sometimes, although we're all individually wired in an amazing way to produce business results, sometimes under crisis or under pressure, we're overusing our behavioral talents. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Sometimes when we over-leverage our talents, that natural style is actually misaligned with what needs to get done right now. And that may produce less than ideal results that you're aiming for. The other thing we're starting to see is misaligned talent. So we may be starting to see people that were doing amazing work pre-crisis, and now we've asked them to maybe do 2 jobs or a job and a half, which is transforming them into a situation where they're not as aligned as they were before. So we'll talk a little bit of what that looks like. And of course, we don't want people coming back to work and not being productive. And sometimes we're going to find they're even more productive if we leave them in a home office. Sometimes that's not the case. So we'll talk a little bit about the risks that are involved as we manage through this situation and power out the other side. Thomas, let me just do a quick check-in. Any questions so far in our chats?
Looks like we're good to go, Dave.
Awesome, thank you. So first of all, I thought we would start together by looking at what is resilience. What do we mean by that? And so resilience, one definition of resilience would be that it's the ability to bounce back after setbacks. The analogy we sometimes talk about in our training programs is imagine, for example, you're on a plane when we can all get back on a plane, and you're traveling with one of your youngsters or perhaps your grandmother, and something happens and the oxygen masks come down. If you've flown before this, you'll recall that somebody says, before we even take off, make sure you put your own mask on first. And of course, the reason for that is you're of no use to anybody else if you can't breathe yourself. And so resilience means taking care of ourselves in a way that we can bounce back and be that leader of the people we're working with. And so I thought it might be interesting to share some research on resilience. We could probably talk all day about this, but this is, I think, an important thing to consider. Where do we get our resilience from? This comes from a study published by Harvard Business Review a little while ago, 835 employees. My organization has a huge impact on my resilience. The work I do has a big impact on my resilience as well. Is it energizing or maybe not so much? But I have the biggest impact on my own resilience. So can I suggest that you own it? We need to make that happen. And for us to be effective for the people we lead and influence around us, our families, our businesses, and our community, we need to manage this carefully. I also thought it'd be interesting to look at what drains our resilience. And so there's a number of different things that will do that. Some things that are probably starting to impact you and will certainly be impacting your staff as you've already brought them back or are bringing them back in the near future, is the volume of work is changing. So as we onboard people again versus the offboarding we've had to do in the past several weeks, we're probably asking in many of our businesses people to do more than one role or a completely different role that they might be never done before and don't feel qualified yet to do. So that overwhelming sense of volume of work. And of course, some of us on this call today are working from home environments. Some of us, like Thomas and myself, we do this all the time. So for us, it's not as big a transition. For many, many other people, it's brand new. And there's distractions. There's dogs and cats and kids and spouses that are in and around us as well. And we're trying to juggle all those things without the physical ability to leave the home and go to work and leave work and come back to home. Sometimes those worlds are completely blurred for us and perhaps will be for the foreseeable future. So we're all under pressure at work in different ways. And of course, then we had COVID hit, which has impacted it even more tremendously. So we're having to deal with an innovative home office of some sort. It may not be ideal. It may be that we're at our kitchen table trying to do work while we're taking care of a youngster or a senior parent in our household, for example. The point is that we're feeling pressure perhaps more than we've ever had before. And we need to consider this as you start to bring your people back or start to manage them more remotely than you've ever done before. Try to remember the world they're in right now and help them be resilient themselves. The next thing I thought we would share is a bit of a snapshot to where we see our economy going moving forward. And I want to sort of first of all check in and see what your biggest challenges are. So Thomas, can you set us up for this brief poll, please?
For sure. Yep, everyone. So I'm going to launch the poll and it'll show up on your screen. This will be a multiple choice poll. And so you'll be able to choose up to 4 with the question being what are your biggest business challenges? So I'm going to launch the polling. It is now live.
Perfect. Thank you.
Seeing a couple votes come in now.
Excellent. Sometimes we frame this question up as what's keeping us up at night right now around our business? What are some of those big challenges?
Interesting pattern so far. Right, I think we'll give another 10 seconds and then we can close that polling down.
Great, thanks, Thomas.
Great, I'm just gonna end the polling, share these results.
Excellent, great stuff. So, looks like finding right talent still remaining very, very critical. I suspect that some of our businesses that are actually have had some opportunities within this whole situation. Building better operational processes, that might be part about driving efficiencies in the business and getting the most out of our people, and building a solid business strategy. So thank you, Thomas. Some really common themes and some important themes we need to be considering, and hopefully we'll share some ideas here this morning that'll assist you with this. So some studies that we have done, and this is interesting. We looked at this sort of data, this sort of information late 2019. And so when we did a global study with CEOs, again, large and small, for-profit, not-for-profit organizations, there were a number of key things that stood out in the latter part of 2019. And so aligning people with strategy, very similar theme to what we just heard, for example. Getting the most out of our people, very, very important. And what we're finding is today when we ask these questions, is that in many cases, these particular themes are here right now as well. And perhaps even more important, we have to get more done, probably with fewer resources, and certainly in a shorter period of time than we would have even back in January of this year. So here's some other things that we're hearing, and perhaps some of these will resonate with you. So as we look at this situation here in Atlantic Canada, across the country, and indeed across North America, we're hearing a number of key things. In some cases, our sales are exploding. I just got an email from a client in Fredericton called Lumen Ultra. I'm not sure if you know this company, but their business has been exploding as a result of this. Many others of us have been challenged with sales, so we're trying to sort of manage that slump in sales and build a pipeline for future revenue as quick as we can. The changing way of work. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use some data to get your arms wrapped around that, but the way work gets done, where work gets done is evolving very quickly, and that new normal may be that that's how work will get done for the foreseeable future. For some of us, cash flow problems, and that could be as a result of rapid growth and try to get rapid financing. It could be just we're trying to manage our cash flow with a significant downturn in our business as well. And of course, we've been in this long enough. I think most of us are restless and ready to get back to work and make stuff happen. So let's focus on the recovery and get that happening. Of course, focusing on our staff and ourselves and our management team and our families to make sure we remain resilient. So suspect that some of these themes might sound familiar to you. Again, hopefully some of the ideas we'll share here this morning will assist as you address these business challenges and opportunities. So again, we're going to talk about overused strengths, misaligned talent, and how to unfreeze the workforce. I want to share just a data piece that I got from the APEC Summit webinar that was happening about 2 months ago now. Some of you might indeed been on this. And being optimistic, the recovery for Atlantic Canada is already starting to see some green shoots of, and hopefully we'll start to see that happen. But all the evidence so far tells us that Q3, Q4, optimistically, we should start to see things start to climb back out. And of course, we here in our region are based, or a lot of our business success is in part dependent on Central Canada, and Canada in general is also very dependent on the US. And so in some parts of Central Canada, the scenario is still being played out, and certainly in many parts of the US as well. So we'll have to together see what this looks like. My message is, let's get ready right now. We might have more capacity and would have had a little more capacity to focus on some of these things over the past couple of weeks than we might have before this whole situation happened. So I want to talk a little bit about a model called talent optimization. And this is a model, quite frankly, we as an organization borrowed the best practices from many of our clients, and we sort of created a language around this. And we call it talent optimization. I think it's going to probably resonate with you folks today. We all have a business strategy. You may personally have been writing that business strategy, personally involved in executing it, or a part of the team that's executing it. And that business strategy, chances are, might have changed since the 1st of January to now, but you still have a business strategy you're executing with. And that business strategy, whether we're a for-profit or not-for-profit, government or non-government organization, there's results we're aiming for. And so that business strategy aims for certain targets this year, 5 years, 10 years out from now. What I'd like to share with you is an idea around the people piece of this. Because no matter how technical or untechnical our business is, people are your most appreciating asset, and they're the people that are going to help get you to the next level. So I'd ask you to consider, what does your people strategy look like today? What's the design of it? What's the structure look like? Where are your people right now? So this is not about engagement necessarily, but if you have engagement data, pull it out, resurvey, check in, see how people are doing today. Some of us are going to continue to have to be hiring. We already are, in fact, and some of us may be very, very surgical in that hiring at the moment. So what do you need for today's business case versus yesterday's? And more importantly, I would argue, how are you unleashing the potential of the people you have in your business right now? So how do you inspire? So that diagnose, design, hire, and inspire piece is the talent strategy. And our goal here today is to share some best practices to help you think about how you can refine your talent strategy to make sure your business results get achieved that are mapping back to your business strategy. So, first of all, we're going to talk about knowing yourself, knowing your leaders, and knowing how they behave. And let me challenge perhaps some traditional thinking where some of us might think, I'm not a leader. I would argue you are a leader. You have more impact on the people around you, whether you have the positional title of manager or not. So we're going to suggest that we're all leaders. Know yourself in that regard. What our global experience tells us is the great leaders of large or small organizations, they practice some version of this talent optimization framework. So some of you on this call, I suspect, are using various kinds of assessment instruments of some sort to help run your business successfully or organization successfully. Can I challenge you to get that data out right now? Bring it back out, look at it, reflect on it. And we're going to talk a little bit about some things you may want to look at and reflect on and be strategic about. Most organizations work with great people and great teams. And to understand those dynamics, we need to think a little bit about how those people are wired. So if you've got a behavioral assessment data system of some sort, get that data back out. You also need to perhaps be considering how fast are people going to learn in our current situation. And that may be different than just a couple of months ago. So there's lots of great systems that get at cognitive data. I think of this as the speed of learning. And the final thing you're going to want to consider is, what does the business need from job X versus job Y today? Again, it may be the same as 3 months ago. It might be completely different. So be prepared to dust off that behavioral data, get a look at it, and build it back into your talent strategy. As an example of this, we have in our programs a predictive index. Some of you might have perhaps done this in the past or seen it in the past. This particular survey is a behavioral or leadership class system. For the predictive index, takes about 6 minutes to do. And by the way, as a part of this webinar, if you haven't done already, please take advantage of the opportunity to try it for yourself to sort of see what it looks like. These are examples of behavioral class systems. DISC, Myers-Briggs, Profiles XT, some others would be good examples of really good class behavioral kinds of assessments. Typically, as you pull out this data or get access to this data, I'm going to ask you to think about 4 basic things that we all have. So as a quick crash course on behavioral science, everybody on this webinar today has dominance. We've all got extroversion. We've all got patience. We've all got formality. Dominance, think about that as the drive for control. Some of us love to control things. Some of us are more team-oriented. Extroversion, think about that as the drive for people interaction. Some of us are very social. Working at home right now might be very difficult for us, for example. Some of us are more task-oriented. Patience is talking about the pace of my productivity. Some of us do amazing work when we can focus on a certain number of things in a step-by-step manner. Some of us, that would drive us a little bit crazy, and we need action and really fast-paced environments all the time. And finally, formality, as the name would suggest, is that drive for perfection. Some of us love to dot I's and cross T's. Some of us, that would just drive us crazy. We've all got these drives. And my message here is that the data systems you may already have or want to explore will provide you insight to your people, but also the work and how the work needs to get done. In the predictive index, we happen to have 17 basic reference patterns that are a part of the software offering. And it tells us things about these different individuals, how they do work, how they make decisions. Are they team-oriented or task individual-oriented? Are they fast-paced or slow-paced? Will they dot the I's and cross the T's or kind of do coloring outside the lines? Lots of different information comes out of these different reference patterns. And thank you, first of all, if you've already tried the predictive index, and encourage the rest of you who have not yet, please follow up on the webinar and feel free to try that complimentary assessment. Let me just check in for a second, Thomas. Any questions so far?
We did have one question, just if I did take the assessment result, or if I did take the assessment, how will I get my assessment results? I said that you would follow up, but maybe you can speak to that a little bit further.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we will follow up with you. We'll be offering a 30-minute, no-charge complimentary review of the results with you if you wish. So Thomas and or ourselves will make those arrangements over the next few days. Great question. All right,
that's
so
everything.
Let us continue. Oh, great, thanks, Thomas. So let's accept that we're all amazing the way we are. Let's take a look at what needs to get done in the business. So we've got great people in our business right now, maybe fewer than before COVID, maybe a lot more than before COVID, but we've got people in our organization right now. I want you to think a little bit about the world of work having 2 sides to the same coin. The one side is the actual work to get done. So that's driving that truck, it's doing that accounting work, it's doing those sales, it's being an HR practitioner, and we've also got people doing that work. So really, the world of work has two sides to the same coin I'd like you to reflect on. So first of all, let's consider the work to be done. This is where we need to maybe update our talent strategy. What does the various roles in your business look like today? How does it get done? How does it get done efficiently? How does it reduce costs? How does it produce results? And so you may want to take a look at and reflect on the most important work in your business and understand very clearly what that work looks like and how it needs to get done in your business. The second thing you might want to look at is who do we have doing that work today? And what you may need to be doing in some cases is redeploying people to different roles because the role might have changed. You might have hired me 18 months ago to do job X, but now I'm being asked to do job Y, and I maybe not be as successful as you hope with that. So think about who you've got and the kind of work that needs to get done. One model we found very successful in chatting with clients about this idea, and this isn't our unique model, this is something you probably would have seen before, is you can kind of break your world of work into 4 general categories. There's exploring kinds of work, looking and focusing on new opportunities, for example. There's producing roles in your business, focusing on accumulating talent, for example, or clients and building reputation in the business. There's areas of our business we might call stabilizing, which we're about managing risk and making sure we're doing our financials and IT things appropriately. And then there's more of a people side, that cultivating side. So if you got 100 people or 100 roles or 10 roles or 5 roles, chances are the roles can kind of fall into one of these general categories. We also then would probably have people doing those kinds of roles. Depending on the size of your business, you may be wearing a couple of these hats on a regular basis to achieve the results. But again, the people data that you have will help you understand where they best play. And when they can be in a position to play to their talents, they're probably going to be more successful, easier to manage, and your business is more likely to achieve its results. So let me do a quick poll again. Thomas, can you ask the question of what the top priority was for folks at the beginning of 2020, please?
For sure. And this is launched now. So question being, thinking back to the beginning of 2020, which of the following strategies do you feel most closely describe your team's priorities at the time? We have 4 potential answers there linking up to what Dave just talked about. Good flow of votes in now. Lots of votes.
Excellent. Great.
Awesome.
So love the participation, folks. This is fantastic.
End the polling in about 5 seconds there. Just get your last votes in. All right. Check those results.
Excellent. So it looks like early 2020, exploring and innovating new opportunities, right? Maybe that's acquiring that other business, launching a new line of business, maximizing the opportunities we have. Looks like we're trying to stabilize a little bit, maybe some cultivating, but it sounds like we were focusing on growth for the most part in the beginning of the year. Next question then, what's changed? What's your priority now? Thomas, one more quick poll if you don't mind, please.
For sure. So this is same question, but looking at your situation today. Interesting votes coming in here.
Great. Awesome.
It's like we're just about at 100% voting. Give it about 10 more
Fantastic.
seconds.
Thank you again, folks, for all your participation here. This is great.
All right, and there we go. And end the polling.
Great. Perfect. Interesting. Look how that's changed, right? So for many of us now, we're focusing on efficiencies, reducing costs, right? Managing cash flow, driving efficiencies, all those good things. Those are a little bit different, and noticing a little bit more focus on the people side as well, a little bit more maybe what we would call cultivating. Interesting. Very thankful for that, that insight. Thank you for that. So let's take a look at some ideas. Once you've sort of got your arms wrapped around the kinds of teams you have, here's some ideas as to what they're all about. And so when we look at, for example, an exploring team, these visionaries, these risk-oriented, comfortable with uncertainty kind of folks, and I would argue that perhaps some of us on the call today are like that. Because Thomas was sharing some of the predictive indexes that you folks have already completed, many of you would actually fall into this category. We also have these producing teams. These are the folks that are about competitive, demanding, they're taking charge, they're driving hard for the business, they love competition. And again, several of you on the call today might be in that sort of category. They love solving problems, new and different problems especially. The stabilizing groups are absolutely critical. They don't like the limelight quite as much, but these are people that are very, very important to our business. They're the people that actually help us drive efficiencies. They dot the I's and cross the T's on our contracts and agreements. They make sure that the production is running as efficiently as possible. And of course, these cultivating folks, if I recall, several of you on the call today are in the human resources talent management business. These are people that are critical to making sure the glue happens between the business and the people element of the organization. What happens then when these people, all of us in fact, are sort of navigating a massive storm of some sort, if we can use that analogy? And so what we see is we tend to over leverage our talents. If you're an explorer and just making new things happen, your business requirements right now might actually be to be stabilizing before we can go and chase new opportunities, for example. Or maybe we're kind of a stabilizing culture, but we absolutely now need to get out and make new things happen to respond to the situation. So what happens sometimes in these cases is we start to become even more under pressure, and we tend to, as leaders, become more of who we are. And the question then is how is that aligned with what the organization actually needs you to be doing? So here's an example. Let's use the sales analogy, where perhaps in the business, sales are not meeting their targets. Our sales team has not met its targets. For some of us, that's probably the reality we're in right now. So if I'm a manager, I'm worried about losing my job. If I'm a business, I'm worried about having to lay people off because we haven't got enough revenues. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lean on my team a little bit. I'm going to push harder. I'm going to drive them harder. And in some cases, maybe more normal circumstances, that would probably work fairly well. The challenge is, in worst case scenarios, when we're under extreme pressure, not aware of how we need to maybe modify our behaviors to get better results, we feel we're extremely under threat, and we come out in a much more assertive, maybe aggressive way, and leaning too hard on our people might actually have the opposite result. So again, it's about understanding ourselves first, understanding the situation, and understanding the team you have, so you're not over leveraging your strengths and not sort of really almost freezing up your people versus driving them to more performance. There's a couple of different models to do this with. In our particular software, we've got a really neat feature that allows us to look at the work to be done, which is this purple band here, and the people in the work. And so in this particular case, if this organization is decided based on those purple bands that we're going to be exploring and producing right now, this particular data set would tell us that with the blue bars being fairly closely aligned, the business strategy, the roles, the work to be done is pretty aligned, in fact, with the people doing the work. What does your data tell you about your positioning right now? Other circumstances that we've seen as we work with our clients in this way is that there may be some misalignment. This organization, for example, has decided they're going to be focusing on cultivating, a little bit on exploring as well. There seems to be a big gap in both of those areas. Now, that doesn't mean to go in and broom people out. It might mean we need to redeploy some people that are already in our business. And if nothing else, as ourselves and understanding our style, making adjustments so we can play in those other areas for our business sake. So for example, what do we do? How do we tip, or what tips do we have rather to build the resilience? And some of this is going to be based on the group or on the individual team that you're working with. So here's a couple of ideas using the exploring team as an example. Remember that these explorers, they're visionaries, they're risk-oriented, they go out and make stuff happen. Many of us on the call are like this. Our characteristic style is to maybe under these situations take uncalculated risks. And this is maybe where we're going to want to lean on our financial advisor or IT expert when we try to over-leverage perhaps our existing IT infrastructure, for example. And sometimes I'm going to come up with 10 great ideas, but the reality is I have to focus on 3 or 4 first. Where perhaps in the past I could throw all 10 out there and maybe 7 or 8 would win. I need to be a little more strategic, right? I need to leverage maybe some other people on our team, listen better to other people who come up with some alternative ideas, and that might help me become more resilient. So more than over-leveraging my strengths, I can start to be more strategic with that and leverage other people on our team that might see things differently. We've got some resilience tips for all of these different types of categories. And again, look at your people data, look at your groups, look at your teams. Where do they fall? Any questions, Thomas, before we start sharing some ideas on realigning operations?
The only question that we have coming up is just, will you be able to follow up with this data? Some people say so much great data, I'm just having a little bit of a tough time keeping up with it. And I just mentioned that you will be doing a follow-up. You can do a private follow-up session, 30 minutes with them to sort of tie this into their business. But I don't know if you want to speak to that real quick.
Absolutely. Thank you, Thomas. Yeah. So if any of you have worked with us before, we have a tendency to try to put 10 pounds of honey in a 6-pound jar. And we're so passionate and excited about what we do. We want to share as much as we can in our brief period of time. So, we're going to make ourselves available for you to go back through one-on-one, if you like, or with your teams to sort of, decompress a little bit and unpackage some of these great ideas for you. So feel free to reach out to either Thomas or myself, and we'll be glad to set that up for you. Thank you, Thomas. Let's next take a look at realigning operations then. So in some cases, we're realigning operations because the business is growing very, very rapidly. Some of us are realigning operations because the business has been shrinking very rapidly for the short term. So let's take a look at what that means. Again, back to the talent piece, it might mean that now we've got people in a role that doesn't fit them quite as well as it did before. So again, back to people data, job criteria data for our HR professionals on the call here today. Let's understand what your business needs today. If you've got HR advisors on your team, reach out to them, get them to leverage these resources. If you've not got HR on your team, reach out to some consultants that will help you with this. It's probably more important than ever to have a clear understanding as to what that role looks like. In some cases, it's going to be more of how we used to do it. So even more important to get it done right. Other cases, it's a completely different type of job. Again, as the Predictive Index as an example, our particular software provides an objective, evidence-based approach to figuring out what the business needs from job X versus job Y. How fast do I need to learn things in the job? Behaviorally, what's the personality, if you like, of the job? Then once you've got that target, you can consider the people in the position and see what kind of strategies you need to employ to make sure that people are successful in the role or teams of people are successful in the role. If we are, for example, looking at exploring, what kinds of people do we need to attract for those kinds of work? So again, leveraging people data. If we're looking for the work to be done on innovation, we need to attract the people that match that. If you've got enough of the right people in the right kind of roles, the business is going to be reaching its targets. If any of you've read some books by Jim Collins, he uses the analogy of getting the right people on the bus. I take that term a little bit further and say get them on the right seat on the bus to help them be successful. So if you're explorers, here are some of the people you might need to have on your group. If you're in the producing mode right now, we need to be accumulating clients, building reputation in the field, for example, outmaneuvering the competition. Then you're going to want to think about having people on your team in those roles, maybe redeploying them over here to help your business achieve that, because you're going to be thriving on competition. You want them to be executed efficiently, for example. Are your people aligned to reach your producing goals if that's where your business is going? Some of us are having to stabilize. We're having to regroup, sort of take a breath, stabilize so we can be prepared for the next bounce back. So that means different characteristics, and that may not be our natural talents, but we may need to elevate some of the people in our business that have those natural talents so they can help us be more organized, more precise, more thorough, more ROI focused, and reducing our costs and driving efficiency, perhaps in our production or equipment operations area of our business. And of course, we always will need to be thinking about the people piece of our business. What people do we have? How are they doing? Like, how are they coping with this whole scenario? Are you training and motivating and coaching them in a way that works for them? And it might be very different than what might work for you. So finally, as we push into the home stretch here this morning, I want to talk a little bit about how you unfreeze your people. And again, it comes back to having some data. Think a little bit about the world of work right now. Some of us are different generations in our work environments. We might have different distractions working from home. Some of us have kids. Some of us have grandparents. Some of us have spouses that are working from home, but we've never had to work so close together. We need to think a little bit about that as we're managing people. We're bringing people back in different ways. We're changing up our work schedules. We're having to maybe redirect our clients through our shops in completely different ways, which is change. It's new. And on top of that, we may be fearful or worried about what we are bringing into or bringing home in terms of this whole virus situation. So think again about the people you got, and in some cases, those people are going to feel very frozen or paralyzed. So as we push into the home stretch, a reminder of this talent optimization model. You've all got business strategies. You've all got business results you're aiming for. What is your people talent strategy in between? Are your people aligned with your business to achieve the results? We've got some resources we're going to share through the Chamber of Commerce that you're able to download and use. We'll also make available to you the complimentary opportunity to try some predictive indexes just for yourself. So our offer back to you on behalf of our team to ours here in Halifax is 5 complimentary predictive index surveys for your management team. And we'll do a work style survey as well, just like you've seen in a couple of our screenshots here. Thomas, I believe we're pretty close to the end of our timeline here. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I had 1 or 2 sent to me privately. One just said, if my team is completely misaligned, but we're not in a position right now to be hiring, what do I do?
Yeah, great question. From our collective experience, it's probably even more important to get an update on what the role actually needs today. So as quick as you can, figure out what those jobs look like, then understand who the person is that's doing the role. Yes, they're misaligned. I believe, personally, we all believe in our business, people are remarkably resilient, remarkably adaptable. It takes work, takes effort, takes good management. But look at the role. What do you need? Who do you have? Where are the fits and gaps? And start to help together with that person, maybe a coaching strategy to help them bridge those gaps. And maybe if required, if it's a big role, remind that person to be building their own personal resilience strategy so they can be on their game every day, even when they're doing a job that just doesn't fit them very well. It's a great question. Probably real for many of us.
Just had, so we have 2 going here. Number 1 is, we're in a position of needing to fill a few vacancies on our team. Any advice on how to onboard people successfully when we're now working remotely from home?
That's a great question. Interestingly enough, I mean, even there was some value in these kinds of tools, ours or somebody else's in the past, but in many ways now we may not actually meet that employee until this whole scenario goes away. So, I don't mean to over talk the same message, but get an idea what you want, what you need, get that clear first. Get some behavioral and cognitive data of some sort from somebody on those individuals, and think about your own style, and then think about how they need to be managed remotely. So interestingly, some people are even more productive now that they're working from home than they ever were before, and would really prefer to stay that way. Others of us, not so much. So again, leverage the data. Remember as well that these sorts of information systems only tell you part of the story. About a third of the story is how we say it. Knowledge, skills, experience, values, other things are obviously very important. But as quick as you can, get some data on who that person is, and you're probably better equipped to manage them, whether they're right next door to you in the next workstation or office, or whether they're working from their garage at a makeshift desk of some sort. Great question.
We have another one here saying, how often do you do all of this realignment and check in on this with your clients?
It's a great question. What we typically find is that with the beginning of some sort of fiscal year, business strategies are generally developed. Those business strategies will look at a host of things, including the talent strategy component. And most organizations will do quarterly, maybe monthly, but usually quarterly, maybe semi-annually, some just once a year check-ins on their strategy. What we're finding over this last number of months is that this is a more fluid situation, that organizations have got to be a little more fluid and flexible than they would have in the past. So I think our advice would be, first of all, update your strategy, and maybe be prepared to check in on that strategy in 45 or 60 days as the situation continues to evolve here in our region, nationally and globally. So it may depend a little bit on your business, but if you haven't got a strategy to begin with, you're kind of navigating in the dark. So start by building and updating that strategy, and think about your business as to how often you might need to be revisiting it.
We have a few more coming in here. How do I talent plan for recovery from the context of not knowing what our key funder is doing, so we can't plan to align?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. So, I guess the worst case scenario planning, or in best case scenario planning. So best case scenario planning, here's what we're going to do. The funding's going to come in. We've got the funding to do the great work that we're doing. Here's our best case. What some of our nonprofit clients have been doing is they've been looking at that best case scenario, looking at the different kinds of roles that are involved in that best case scenario. Then they've been working backwards. So worst case, funding doesn't come in, or I only get half the funding. I'm going to have to blur or blend these two roles together. What does that look like? How different is that? So again, being clear and strategic about the work to be done, either best case or worst case scenario, then we can start to look at the people we've got and see how we maybe need to deploy them differently or coach them differently to do more than they would normally want to do in our business.
And then we have another one here. Any suggestions to keep the team motivated during recovery period?
Yeah, I think one of the best pieces of advice we could offer would be, coach, manage, show concern, show empathy, be curious from their world. We all as managers have to deal with the scenario as well. But think about what their world is all about. Who are they? What are they going through? What's their personal situation like right now? And try to be as empathetic and real and honest and transparent as you can. I think those key characteristics will probably fare you well. You may not be able to fix it. You probably can't fix it necessarily, but being transparent, being genuine and curious about how they're doing, I think will get you a long way. I think people will appreciate that. And they'll remember the managers that don't show that. And when the things start to bounce back, and they will, they'll be the first people to say, you know what, see you later. You want to keep those great people for the future. It's a really smart retention strategy.
Awesome. And I just got a message. Sandra, Cindy, do you guys have any questions that have come through to you?
Yeah, I have actually a couple more questions here that came in. Is it a trial and error process, or do managers need to get it right the first time?
Well, I guess ideally managers are perfect, but we know that managers are people too, and it's not probably going to be perfect. But I guess our general advice would be use some evidence, use some science. And people are certainly complex, but there is a science to these kinds of great programs. So our advice would be is to leverage the evidence, get to know the evidence, use it, and be prepared. There's going to make some mistakes. And I guess if we're out of line or not doing things the way we need to be doing, you got to be prepared to change it up a little bit and do it better next time. Learn from our mistakes. Managers aren't perfect, but in terms of building a management pipeline in our business, the earlier and more frequently we can reinforce their management skills, which is usually a host of competencies, the more equipped they're going to be when situations like this or something less serious happen in our business.
Right. And speaking of communication skills, are managers looking for more employee feedback, do you think, now that we're in a crisis world?
They probably are. And some managers are actually sort of demanding more because they feel they are out of touch, right? So if you can imagine for a moment, I'm used to walking down the hall and seeing Cindy or Sandra. I can't necessarily do that anymore. And you're not as easily available. You might be on some sort of chat like Slack or something where I can ping you pretty quickly. But I think it depends a little bit on the manager. So again, a manager needs to think about what do they naturally need and how are they going to be communicating effectively with people that maybe don't need to be checked in on every few minutes, right? Check in with ourselves, do a little bit of self-reflection, remind yourself of your natural characteristics, and are you managing your people from your world or their world? And there's a lot of evidence that tells us if we can manage effectively from their world in the context of the work that needs to get done, they're likely to be easier to manage and more effective. Communication is part of that.
Sorry, Dave, I just have two more coming in, just one from someone who says they need to jump off real quick.
Sure.
Hi, Thomas. Thanks for the sample PIs for my staff. One of the people doesn't think that the description really reflects who she is, though she answered the question truthfully on the PI. How can I explain or explore this with her?
Yeah, that's a great question. So very, very quickly, the predictive index, and every one of these assessments has a different construct, so I can only speak to the predictive index. The predictive index will tell us three stories briefly: who I am really at my core, who I'm trying to become, and a little bit of the observable style. And so sometimes people are not going to see themselves the first time in the one part of that survey. My advice would be with that individual, circle back with Thomas or myself afterwards. We can help frame up the conversation for you so that we can have a good, appropriate conversation about what the results are telling us. Our collective experience over many, many decades is this probably that person, for whatever reason, they don't feel they can be that way. And there's some other pieces of the PI results we can help you interpret to get a better feel for that. Great question.
David, we have an interesting contextual one here saying, do you have resources to support talent who are holding the extra burden of sort of the racism and systemic racism and trauma being shown daily that impacts proud members of the community of people of African descent? I know sort of a question relating to PI and the bias.
Yeah, that's a great, it's a very timely question. Again, I can't speak for all of these types of systems. I can speak though with great confidence that the Predictive Index, with a lot of ongoing research from our science team, is extremely unbiased. It's really neutral. We don't care of anyone's ethnic or backgrounds of any kind. The Predictive Index science ensures that we get accurate, evidence-based results on who the individual is. We have tremendous resources we'd be glad to share with people to help better understand and feel comfortable and confident with the science, which would allow us to use this information system appropriately and rightly in the organization. It's a great question, Thomas.
So it looks like that might be all the questions, unless Cindy, I'm not sure if you had any others come through to you, but that's all I have on my end.
I just maybe have one more, excuse me, might be a nice question for closing. Is work-life balance still the goal in most workplaces?
I would argue it is, and I think it's probably even more difficult right now to attain. What we're seeing with some interesting organizations is they're actually, trusting more than they would have before, and finding that work is getting done even better. And sometimes, sometimes the older outlook of work is I need to control you, I need to see you, I need to manage you hard to get work done. A lot of evidence has been telling us before this all happened that that's not necessarily the case. And if we think about Gen Zs and millennials and younger X's, they want and need that work-life balance. So if there's any way to be creative and less controlling of our people, in many cases, it actually works better. That's not always possible in some industries. But my hunch is, or our hunch is that trend of more work-life balance is going to continue to be there. And then the last quick comment I would make on that is there seems to be some growing conversations around, I kind of like working from home. I kind of like not having to drive for 45 minutes or an hour and a half. That quality of life is sort of being reminded for some folks. And they may not want to go back to that 80-hour work week. Maybe I'll work 60 hours and I'll save some time off the commute, for example. So I think it's challenging all of us to rethink our world of work. And what is it going to look like for your business? Remembering your people are your most appreciating asset. It's a great question.
Right. I know it's definitely speaks true to people within my personal and professional network, where some of us, some felt that every single day, even a Saturday and Sunday, was, a work day, where others needed a weekend. Right. It's everyone's in a different boat. Right.
Yep,
yeah,
absolutely. And where and how work gets done is completely different today than it would have been just a few years ago, for sure.
That's right. Or I should say, what did I see online? It's the same storm and a different boat. I think that's what I saw. Anyway, something like that.
Absolutely, that's a great point.
So I think we're running out of time. We'll wrap up. But should anyone have any other questions following this, then I'm sure you can absolutely send in to myself or Thomas. So thank you, David. That was a very insightful presentation. Thanks so much for your time and the opportunity to really pick your brain on our discussion today. So there are several, but oh, I'm sorry here. I lost my place. Sorry about that. So several best practices that managers can implement to develop a resilient workforce and capable of achieving success. So after you've shared your insights, now we know the significance of future-focused strategic planning and this particular endeavor. So thank you, and thank you to all who joined us. So the Halifax Chamber is hosting more webinars every week with experts who are leading the business community and pioneering the new normal, as we're calling it. So later today, we'll have another webinar on the post-promise with our President and CEO, Patrick Sullivan. So make sure everyone that you tune in. You can also head to halifaxchamber.com/events for a full events lineup. So just as a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be available to all attendees shortly. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great day. I see the sun is shining out there, so enjoy.
Great. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.